Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Awaken the World. My name is Garhen, and this is our live help and advice session. Happy Austera Day to everybody. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're just going to give a minute for people to come online. We're also going to talk about one of the questions that one of our group members brought up, and I believe that was Rachel. And that was the difference between soul and spirit. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that today as well and kind of set those straight. And to do so, we're going to go way back into the 1700s and have a little chat with Blavatsky. And that's an interesting topic if you haven't heard anything about Madame Blavatsky. I sincerely suggest you read the original Old English version of Lifting the Veil of Isis. It's a two-part volume set. The first is science, and the second part of it is, of course, religion. And it is a fantastic, absolutely fantastic, medium-communicated book. And it's wonderful. It really is. So without further ado, we're going to get going this morning. And I just want to start everyone off by giving them a necessary public service reminder to whatever you do, beware of the Easter Bunny. This guy was seen prowling our streets this morning, and when I approached him and asked him about, Easter and why he was actually here, this was the result. Sort of reminds you of when you question Christians about the Bible. You sort of get the same thing. So what indeed is Easter all about? Well, in actuality, we can thank the Teutonic deity Ostra or Austera, and she was the goddess of spring and fertility. And this was a pagan god, of course. And the feasts were held in her honor on the vernal equinox, and her symbol was the hare. Not the rabbit, but the hare. There's a number of differences between rabbits and hares, but one of the most profound differences is that hares actually make their dwellings on top of the ground, whereas rabbits, with the exception of the cottontail rabbit, make their dwellings underground and live below ground. There's differences in height and weight and ear size, the whole nine yards, but this is indeed the source of Easter. And for anyone who's unclear what happened is back, Christianity is actually a relatively new religion. And because of that, what they did is they picked up all the pagan goddesses and gods and holidays and ceremonies and feasts and specific dates, and then fit them to fit their own story. Okay, so the idea of us celebrating, supposedly Christ's resurrection on Easter is ridiculous, actually. When you go out on that Easter hunt, or you get your kids some eggs, you're actually celebrating the pagan deity of spring and fertility, which was Ostara or Astra, depending on which version you read and what the translation is. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the soul versus the spirit. And the one self, the Atman, is as known in the Upanishads and in the Bhagavad Gita, okay? And I do have some reading today, and I am going to be doing some reading. And this comes from the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 13. As a single sun illuminates the whole world, even so does the one spirit illumine every body. The Apostle Paul in Thessalonians says, you consist of spirit and soul and body. Spirit is who and what you really are. Pure eternal spirit is your real self. That is your essential nature. This is the one sea of consciousness. The highest, the most rarefied part of your being is this Atman, the one self. There is not a different... Still like the chocolate eggs. Yes, right, honey. There is not a different spirit for each person. Just as one sun shines on our planet, there is one spirit shining on all creation, that one sea of consciousness, that individual one. There is no such thing as my spirit. Okay? No such thing. That's a dream of the ego and its desire to own everything and attach everything to it by the word mine and I, okay, and me. But in fact, spirit knows no separation. It is what the Hindu called the Atman, the self, and it is one and the same essence as the supreme self. Okay, 2 capital S's, that infinite sea of consciousness. Just as a multitude of sparks are sent forth from a blazing fire, so countless sparks of the one Supreme Spirit are sent forth into the manifested universe. And eventually they will return to the one. These divine sparks, or shards of the Creator as I call them, and that is actually from Blavatsky as well. Blavatsky had come up with an amazing little quote, and I really loved it years and years ago, and I've incorporated into my own. And that is every single religion and philosophy on the planet has a shard of the mirror of truth. They have a little tiny piece of that mirror of truth. But of course, especially if you're a Christian, you think you have the only piece of that mirror of truth. And that's where all the problem comes in. Each one of those pieces of the mirror of truth reflect an aspect, and only an aspect. We really need ourselves to reassemble that whole mirror again for ourselves. This soul, as we would call it, unlike the spirit, is an individuated thing, I guess we could call it. It is the shard of the Atman that manifests itself as what you would call you in this physical realm. The soul is indeed a permanent entity, and the self-conscious individuality or ego which incarnates, it is that I of being. That is the same thing as the mind. That which we would call the soul is not our soul. It is the ego energy presence. That which allows the manifestation of your physical existence. And it is not the same as the Atman, and yet it is still the Atman. Individuated into one form. And that form produces, of course, the ego, that memory bank. And it is that memory bank of the experience that we would call the soul, that collection of experiences and memories from our visit to this mortal plane. And that's what is transferred back into the Atman. And that is why when you first die, you will retain your thinking opinion of yourself in the way you look and in the people you expect to meet on the other side. All those things come out of what we would term the lower soul, which we're really going to confuse things if we start talking that way. So it's better to understand that the soul indeed is simply the ego manifestation. It is the shard of the Atman, the one sea of consciousness that individuates itself into the physical realm and materializes here in this physical realm, starting as a baby. Or in my case, hatched full size. Just as we should never make the mistake of thinking that the mind and the brain are the same thing, you know, the brain is merely a physical organ. And the mind is the individual soul. That is the individuation of the divine. And this individuated soul thinks, expresses itself through and with the aid of the brain. We have a different brain in each lifetime because we have a different physical body, but the mind in it is the same mind. It is the mind, the ego sense, the soul, the shard of consciousness, of the one consciousness, of the Atman, of the all that is, that continues to grow, continues to incarnate itself, and it only expresses itself to the extent of the evolution of its own being back towards that state of oneness, back towards the Atman. You know, you can think of it like a flow chart. Remember those flow charts, and at the top you have a box, and at the top of that box, that's the Atman. And then if you were to look underneath that box, there'd be an infinite number of little arrows away from that box pointing to additional little boxes, and all of those little boxes we would term the soul, or the individuated ego consciousnesses. Not only here on this planet, but on a myriad number of planets throughout the whole known universe and the unknown universe. The soul is what reincarnates. The spirit does not. The spirit is one. No philosophy in history has ever claimed that it is the spirit that reincarnates. Spirit does not have direct connection or contact with the physical form. It is the sea in which all of that manifests itself. To re-become in consciousness, to consciously merge with the Atman, to unite the ego or the soul with the higher self, is the greatest goal of all. It is the goal why we are here. Union, or yoga. The word yoga means union or yoke. And part of yoga is to remove the yoke of your false existence and realize the union of your egoic being, your soul, and the one self, the Atman, that one sea of consciousness, the Creator, God if you must. We really don't have many excuses to why we can't understand the difference between the two of them, okay? And part of the reason is, of course, is that Christianity and other religions have really made a balls up of the entire truth of things to serve themselves. And this is where the problem always comes in to. You know, if you read H.P. Blavatsky, you'll be able to comprehend a little more clearly the nature of the soul versus the spirit. This soul is what we would call Garhen, okay, the manifestation in an egoic sense. That manifestation does not have independent existence outside of that one sea of consciousness. It is the sea of consciousness that is manifesting itself. And it does so in trillions and trillions of innumerable forms, really. Sir Edmund Arnold, he translated a little piece of the Bhagavad Gita called The Song Celestial. And I'm going to read that to you. Never the spirit was born. The spirit shall cease to be never. Never was time, it was not. End and beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless and changeless remaineth the spirit forever. Death hath not touched it at all. Dead, though the house of it seems. What is the house? The house is, of course, the temple, the body in which we inhabit. The second article we're going to take a little look at, and this comes from the Theosophy website, and it's a fantastic research website and a fantastic place to get a little better handle on our history and the evolution of religion. Okay, the Sanskrit word Atma or Atman is, it literally means self with a capital S. It is not the individuated self, which is the soul. And that soul is really false on the one hand. I mean, even though the soul has a very real appearance here in the physical realm, we must never forget that that soul is also immutable. It is part of that one sea of consciousness. It can never die. It will only grow on evolving and evolving. As I've said before, everything manifest in the physical realm is a direct remnant or monument to what is happening at the spiritual level, at the level of consciousness, at the level of awakening. In the Upanishads, the Gita, and the teachings of the Vedanta, or the Hindu philosophy in general, it is the ancient teaching that the higher self, the true higher self, that one soul, breaks down and manifests itself, excuse me, into all of these shards. And these shards, even though we appear to be individuated and separate from each other, our essential nature and the highest part of our being is in fact the same essence, the same material, the same power as the Absolute, as God itself. So thus, although we can see many souls in the people we deal with every day, and 7.5 billion souls on the planet, there indeed, in ultimate reality, is just that one spirit, that Atman, that sea of consciousness. Just as one and the same sun shines over everybody on this earth, so one and the same spirit shine over and illumine every soul. One of the great sayings of Hinduism is Ayam Atma Brahman. This Atman is Brahman. Unfortunately, Christian conditioning in the West for thousands of years, we struggle to comprehend the notion that our higher self is not a part or portion of the divine, but is actually the divine itself. And this is the point I keep trying to hammer home to people, okay? What you are is divine. Divine in nature, divine in manifestation, divine at every level. And your soul, okay, your egoic sense of self, the energetic manifestation of you into this material realm, is a shard of that. Never separate from it. Always part of it. Reincarnating time and time and time again into life forms all across the universe in order to grow in conscious awakening back towards Source. And we in this physical realm undertake the same journey as mirrored in the spiritual realm. We are literally pilgrims making our progress back home again. It's like we were all dumped out in the middle of the desert, and we chose it. We said, this is going to be fun. Dump us all out in the desert of the physical realm, and we will find our way back. And why is it fun? Because finding your way back is never in doubt. There is never a time when you will not be accepted back into that sea of consciousness from which you arise. The Atman, the one self, the one being that we are all manifested in and as a part of. This is our heritage and this is our existence. When it comes to the Easter eggs and most of the other holidays, to be honest, all as we see is the rampant commercialism these days. And we don't buy into it. We simply don't. If I want some Easter chocolate, I wait till a couple of days after Easter is over, and I go buy the same stuff for 25% of the cost that they want for it on the Good Friday. And let's face it, it's not like it's good for us anyways. Especially those white bunnies. That's not even chocolate. I don't even know why they would even call that chocolate. One of the most celebrated symbolic illustrations is of two golden birds perched on the same tree. Okay? And this is found in a number of the Upanishads and is probably expressed most clearly in the Mundaka Upanishad, scripture of total esoteric brilliance. One of the birds is the Jiva, the reincarnating ego, the human soul. The other one is the Atman, the pure eternal spirit, our real self, the one universal self we all share. The former, the Jiva, or the ego, eats the sweet and sour fruits of the tree of life, while the latter looks on in detachment, without eating. It is explained that when we fall into the illusion and delusion of identifying ourselves with the personal and individual nature, we feel attached, and we end up falling into sorrow. And we fall into the suffering because the suffering is the way to come out of the suffering. We will choose, consciously or unconsciously, to suffer until we no longer choose to suffer. Realize that you are the self, with a capital S, the Lord of life, and you will be free from sorrow. When you realize that you are the self, the supreme source of light, of creation, the supreme source of love, you can then transcend the duality of life and enter into that unitative state. That state where the jiva, the ego, the soul, if you will, is in constant conscious union with the divine, with the Atma. And of course, we're always in union with the Atma. We're never separate from it. It is our false sense of self that creates the separation. It is our false sense of who we are that creates the concepts that we are not good enough, or we are not able, or not strong. And my Happy Ostera Day gift to you is the realization that you are this magnificently powerful spiritual being, here manifesting a human experience. The Atma and its vehicle, this temple, which serves as, let's say, the antenna from which the ego, the jiva, broadcasts. In the principles of Buddhi or Buddhism, we call that the monad, or the primary or ultimate unit. There is nothing higher than this Atman, this one soul. This one soul is the principle of all existence. And again, don't get caught up in words. Okay? The soul is speaking of the differentiated, individualized ego, identity, energetic force manifesting a human body here. It is a shard of the spirit, the one spirit of all. Your soul manifests each of your personalities over and over and over again, working its way back towards conscious union with spirit. Although the Atman is who we really are, we are also comprised of other components, okay? And these components are not actual components. What they are is energetic divisions within our being. So the idea that you have a separate spirit and I have a separate spirit is a total misconception. Your spirit and my spirit are the same spirit. The most ancient book that we have, the Rig Vedas, okay, states that before the universe came into being, the only one breathed breathless by itself. Other than it, nothing since has been. A couple of the quotes when Blavatsky was asked to talk or explain the Atman or the higher self. In reality, there is no human, but the universal absolute principle of which Buddhi, the soul spirit, is the carrier. You see, higher consciousness, the sea of consciousness manifests everything within it. It's all of this physical realm is manifested within that sea of consciousness. You, as an individuated soul, as an ego, cannot exist separate from that sea of consciousness. That's the big lie that religions would try and sell you. And that is the biggest lie with you that I want to refute, is the concept that you are ever separate from your Creator. That your Creator is anything outside of divine love. There is no judgment. There is nothing to worry about. First of all, spirit in the sense of the absolute and therefore the indivisible all, or Atma. At this neither can be located nor limited in philosophy, being simply that which is in eternity, and which cannot be absent from even the tiniest geometrical or mathematical point of the universe or matter or substance. It ought not to be called, in truth, a human principle at all. The Atma, or the one soul, is not a unit per se. It is a principle. It is the force of consciousness within the universe, that sea of consciousness itself. We're going to stay online for a little bit longer today, and I know it is Easter Sunday, so I'll probably wrap it up a little bit early. We will be back at 1 o'clock today for our 1 hour Sunday Live, Help Awaken. We're going to do that on the Awaken the World page, and I will post a link before that as well, and we will talk about some various subjects as well on that today too. As far as understanding who and what you are, it can seem really confusing, and I hope this has really simplified it for you, okay? The concept of soul, the concept that Christians and other religions would say is your soul, they're really talking about your ego. That individuated shard of consciousness manifested here into a human form, what we would call a human form. The soul is really that hard drive. It is the gatherer of experience. It's like a tendril of the one self, the only self, that sea of consciousness. A little streamlet reaching down and down until there's only a drop of it left. And that one drop feels separate from all the other drops, but it isn't. It's a drop within that infinite sea of consciousness. The higher self, or Atma, is of course non-materializable. It will not appear in physical form, and it cannot be subjective. It has no subjectivity to it. It knows the truth of all things, and it knows the oneness of all things, and it sees through that objectivity. Atma, the inseparable ray of the universe and one self, it is the God above, but more than within. Happy the man or woman who succeeds in saturating his ego or her ego with it. In hours of samadhi, the higher spiritual consciousness of the initiate is entirely absorbed in the one essence, which is Atman, and therefore, being one with the whole, there can be nothing outside of that whole. The term self never really applies, except with a really tiny s, to the ego. Because the ego, of course, is a false sense of self. It's not a true sense of self. And we can ask ourselves, well, if all this was created to do this, why do you say it's a false sense of self? And it is a false sense of self. But in the physical realm, of course, it feels very real. And we take it to be very real. And we live, unfortunately, most of our existences from this false notion that we are separate from each other and separate from the one spirit, that one sea of consciousness. Atma is nothing. It is the absolute. And it cannot be said that it is this or it is that. It is simply that in which we are. Not only that which we live and breathe and have our being, but in the whole universe. Therefore, we are considered to be a vehicle, a temple, through which Atma, the one spirit, breaks itself down into millions upon millions upon millions of shards, each one manifesting, not inhabiting, but manifesting what we would call a human being here having a human experience. Our legacy, our history, our future is wholly dependent on our realization of this one self within each of us. It truly is. This is the reason why, for me, raising consciousness is all that matters anymore. You know, it doesn't matter how much we talk, how much we try to deal with the symptoms of our false sense of living that we undertake in our societies, okay, the endless scrabbling for material goods, the greed and the lies we tell each other, and the, quite frankly, ridiculously sad definitions of love I see coming out of so-called loving Christians. You know, and again, I have to point right to my wife's family. They are a prime example of everything that's wrong with organized religion. Everything that's wrong with it. We as human beings are not here to live our lives in some sort of fear that that there is a place called hell that we can go to. And on this, happy Austera Day, on this Austera Sunday, where we are supposedly celebrating the resurrection of Christ, we're really talking about fertility. We're really talking about spring. And in our natural cycle, spring, this is the time for our energy to start coming back up again. Life is starting to manifest itself again into the world. The long rest, the long night of winter is coming to an end. And the spring or the new day is literally springing forth. Although you wouldn't see it in our place. It was snowing this morning, and it's just stopped snowing now. So we're going to cut it a little short today. Much love and namaste, and we do look forward to seeing everyone at 1 p.m. for the Awaken Sunday Live. And again, happy Ostera Day. May you enjoy your chocolate Ostera eggs, and have some turkey too while you're at it. Much love and namaste. Have a wonderful day.